You may have noticed that I like to include sound effects in my videos, especially to highlight stuff like big moments and jazz spots. Honestly, there's really barely any sound design involved. The vast majority of the time, I'm just achieving an emotional effect through common music tropes. The idea of fitting musical concepts to moving images is not new, and I can look back as far as a century ago to learn from the masters. Silent film pianists essentially made their living off of this stuff. If the sun is out and people are happy, major chord. If the girl is tied to the train tracks, diminished chord. Decades later, video game composers would eventually use surprisingly similar tactics. Whether we've been programmed by our culture to have these associations, or we just naturally have them, or some combination of both, many of us certainly have links between different harmonies and different moods. And for that matter, many of us have responses to other musical factors, like intensity, rhythm, range, and so on. With that being said, I'd like to take some time to explore classic sound effects and how music theory can be used to explain their effect. Boy, have I got some rapid-fire climbing arpeggios to show you. Picking up an item is a near universal element in video games. As such, developers seem to save the most joyous and satisfying effects for the items they want you to pick up tons of. Stuff like coins, rings, feathers, I guess tokens. This makes sense because they're trying to incentivize the player to keep performing this act again and again. A common music theory approach to producing this incentive is creating a sound effect out of major stuff. When collecting a ring in Sonic the Hedgehog, we are presented with a major chord starting on the 3rd. It's pitched up in a super high octave and ascends the entire time. As you may have already noticed, the idea of ascending arpeggio good and descending strange thing bad is pretty widespread throughout classic games. It's worth noting that composers in the 80s and early 90s were often also the game's overall sound designer. Due to the limitations of their primitive hardware, they sometimes use music-based solutions to achieve sound effects, and this has led us to live in this kind of awesome timeline where we have subconscious musical preferences for picking up certain video game objects. If Mario picked up a mushroom and instead of we heard a wave file of a plumber stepping on a mushroom, that would probably just be unsettling. On the other side of this, I'm sure most of us prefer accurate car engine noises as sound effects, rather than white noise as they used in early 8-bit stuff. Mega Man takes it a step further by going up a full major scale to indicate picking up an extra life. And probably the most aggressive of these effects is when Sonic picks up an extra life. Even in the modern 3D era of 1998, Grant Kirkhope used major arpeggios for collecting musical notes, honeycombs, and feathers throughout the N64 Banjo-Kazooie games. Some of these lo-fi jingles are just here to stay in the video game vernacular, regardless of how high fidelity our options get. On the flip side, we have some sounds which represent video game danger. Quite simply, these are often comprised of dissonant intervals. An example of this is getting a question wrong within the quiz stage of Banjo-Kazooie. Minor seconds are so dissonant, you don't even have to program noise to create this effect. Check this sound out when it's just a monophonic line. Then here we just add a minor second. When classic Sonic is struck by an enemy or foreign object, he loses all of his rings, which abruptly spray out in all directions. Instead of the bubbly arpeggios, this moment obviously requires something a bit more dissonant. This time, Sonic is accompanied by a relatively dissonant major second interval. This is more tense than the thirds, and even without a 16-bit console sound chip, we can use this interval to achieve this type of effect. Also, this sound comes in 2 waves, volume-wise. Again, nothing complex from a music theory perspective, but it brings this sound effect closer to representing multiple waves of rings. It's worth mentioning that when we dress up these intervals with more harmonic context, it takes away some of the dissonant bite. In the case of fully voiced major 7 chords, the tension is a little bit disguised when surrounded by these thirds. Given its long run on the Game Boy Color, the Pokémon series is rife with these sorts of musically based effects, and I've decided to do a brief fly-through of some of my favorites. In the first generation games, it appears that Nintendo actually gave unique battle cries to pretty much all of the separate Pokemon species. These are often comprised of a rush of white noise, and some rapid-fire sequence of notes, which adds intensity. The battle cries pretty much run the gamut of compositional techniques. You get stuff like whole tone scales, and whatever Mewtwo has. I also decided to transcribe the encounter sound effect. This melody sounds like it's spinning out of control, and when we look under the hood, we can see these ascending and descending chromatic scales, which add to the confusion. Okay, now to some slightly less definable stuff. Clearing a Tetris garners you a similar effect to that when picking up items in other games. However, this time the developers went a step further and made this a major 7-type arpeggio, adding kind of an extra layer of psychedelia. I would also like to shout out this absolutely fresh series of effects which accompanies you through menus in Street Fighter 2. And here's something I find kind of strange. Check out this bass line from the main menu theme. When you're in this menu moving the cursor around, the cursor itself creates a major third sound effect in relation to it. Yet when the rest of the instruments finally kick in for this theme, they start doing minor pentatonic funk-style stuff. Honestly, I'm not sure that this was intentional, but it seems to me like this makes the cursor's sound effect feel much brighter and more impactful, due to the somewhat jarring contrast with the harmony. I'll have all the effects I reproduced in this video uploaded to the Patreon, along with their musical transcriptions, hopefully in the next few days. Every little bit of interaction with the channel helps. That includes liking, subscribing, and recommending cool stuff for me to check out in the comments. Thanks to my current patrons for their support, and have a dope week.